go on here. We're going to go through the agenda today. So we have the survey introduction from Emil. This is courtesy of some of my former Comcast partners. John Miller, thank you very much for helping us out with the survey platform and the design. It's going to be wonderful, so we look forward to doing some fun things with it. What we're going to be talking today about is some spatial files. How do you pull those from the US Census, and then what kind of fun things can you do with them? I will do a brief overview of how you handle that within Alteryx, and then we'll share a video segment of what that can kind of look like within Tableau specifically, and then obviously that can carry through any other platform that allows for the importation of shape files in the format of Esri, so just those SHP files. And then we're going to do the fun part, date night, which it's almost late enough for that. What we're going to talk about is different date formatting tools that are available within Alteryx, and we can kind of open it up to a general discussion about how you handle dates within your workflow and how you can standardize those, and then also what are the people who are receiving these, either if you're creating the visualizations yourself or if you're handing off this data set to someone who is working within a visualization tool. What kind of date fields should you be giving them to make their lives easier and reduce the burden upon the visualization tool? And then we also are going to be talking about the Designer Core certification, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with that yet. I'll go ahead and share that. This was just newly announced within the community here. So in case you guys haven't been on the community in a while, community page, you can just do a quick search, Core certification. Ta-da. And these are newly announced. So this is going to be the better one. Yeah, so they have some fun badges here that you can get on the community. This is a great reference for how you can obtain this certification. We'll go through this a little bit later. And then your goal is to just go ahead and pass, and it is free, so we'll go through the details. I just finished it up late last night, and we can talk about some studying practices and what kinds of things that exist on the exam. And then after that, we'll talk about Alteryx for Good for a few minutes, and then we'll have a help session, which that help session should be like 45 minutes to an hour. And the goal with that is just if you guys are having any problems, then we can address those live here on the fly if you're able to share your screen or even share a small data set or an example that you can pull from. We're more than happy to help. So let's kind of dive right into it. So let's talk a little bit about the US Census. How many people, you can go ahead and respond in the chat, are interested or have pulled from the US Census before? Yeah, so I'm seeing some thumbs up. And I was definitely interested. I actually did this as a little bit of a weekend project for one of my friends who's in real estate. And then recently with the launch of Tableau 10.4, they dove more into the shape files. So I'm going to go through a couple different things here today, and what those are going to be are how can you go about pulling the files down. Most of these files are zipped and compressed, so I'll go through a workflow of how you can aggregate those down completely together. And then the unzipping file is fairly straightforward as well. If I have some time, I'll show you guys that as well. And then finally, I'll show you this new one, which is in relation to shapefiles in like Tableau 10.4. What you're able to do is pull these shapefiles in, and you can aggregate them together and then make some amazing visualizations. The shapefile part, the credit definitely goes out to a big shout out to Andy Kriebel for posting this and sharing it. And I'll go ahead and post the link for this in the chat here. So this is his post, and then that's what these visualizations come out like. So this is literally free data, and this is all of the major and secondary roads throughout the US. And this is completely public information. He just grabbed all 56 files for the different states. Yes, I know there's only 50 states, but they throw in some of the districts and stuff too. And as well, I think Puerto Rico might be on there too. But literally this workflow is literally this set of tools. So it's not very much work. It's easy to execute on. I literally did it in about maybe 15-20 minutes watching this video, and I was able to pull one of the files. So really it's just the aggregation and pulling them down onto your desktop. So this is a site that you'll end up going to. Navigate you guys here, so if you do want to see what some of the shape files look like, you can pull the primary roads down if you want, just those by themselves, which this will just give you the generic national one. And then the one that Andy Kriebel shows in his videos are the primary and secondary roads. You could also do all roads if you wanted. And then that goes down to the county level. So obviously the more granular you need, you can achieve that. And all of this data, based on the files and stuff that I'm seeing, it's from 2016. So this is pretty fresh data in relation to geographical information. And from here, I mean, if you're watching the video, he'll walk you through the independent steps. This was on his Tableau tips for Tuesdays. And when you're going through here, let me go ahead and share with you. We can walk through the steps. Let's see here. Give me just a second. So, I mean, this is literally what it looks like. So when you go and download the files, you'll end up with a zipped file, which is going to look like this. And you can unzip these individually if you want, or after you download the entire directory, you can unzip them. There are ways to do that within Alteryx. I can go through that a little bit later, or if you want to do that offline. Then from there, what you'll do is you can go in, and if you want to grab all the files, you can use the directory tool. In this instance, I'm just going to go through one to keep it simple and keep the runtime down. So literally what you're doing here is you're going into this individual file, and the one that you're going to be pulling is just the shape file, just this guy right here. So when you go to pull that, it'll give you an output that looks like this. And the one setting that you're going to want to change is you will want to output the file name. And the reason why you're doing that is if you look down here in the results window, you'll notice the file name here. So this is obviously the name of the, what is it, tiger that they have here in the tiger line. right here. So these are the tiger line, and they're responsible for creating this content. Then from there, you've got the year on the front of it. Let's dive back in there. You've got the year on the front of it, and then this is primary, secondary roads. So if you just break that apart, you're stripping off these two sides, which is what we're doing here. So you'll do a replace and just cut that out and replace it with nothing. Same with the primary, secondary roads. Replace it with a blank, and then that gives you just this number. So I just grabbed, I believe this is Alabama. I'm just grabbing Alabama, so all of these FIP codes you're going to see are 01. And then literally your objective from there would be to cross-reference that with the FIPS codes. So I'll paste this in here. I just did a quick Google search, and these are all the FIPS state level codes. And what these codes are meant to do is just abbreviate this geographical region. So once you pull from there, let's go back in here, and we trim down the columns. So I just got rid of the file name because we don't need that anymore. And then there's the linear ID. We don't need that either. So from there, what you'll do is you'll join with those FIP codes that I showed you briefly. It's literally just a text box in this instance. You can do a reference table in your database if you start building quite a few of these out. That could be useful. Then from there, because I did a text import instead of from a Excel file, I had to adjust the type to a string. That way I can merge the two of these. And then from there, you have the information that can group with a state, which is partially what Tableau will pull from. And then this was actually a tip from Chris Love. If you add this generalized tool in there, what you can do is you can reduce the file size down. So this was roughly, I think, a 300 or 500 meg file when he has all 50 states, and it dropped it down to below 50. And what you're doing here is you are changing and adjusting the shape information where it reduces a threshold and keeps it within 1 mile parameters. And then from there, you're just exporting to a shapefile. And from here, then it's just a simple import of how import into Tableau or merging with your other data sets to join those together within whatever your visualization tool is. And then what that'll do, so this is a walkthrough of what those steps would look like by name. Does anybody have any questions about this, or would you like me to go through it a little more in depth? Please just respond on the chat, and then I can circle back around to it. I'll give you guys a couple seconds. So again, the visualization aspect is going to be here, and then that was the results from it. And he can even drill down into the state level, and I couldn't believe the response time on this. Again, this is on Tableau 10.4, so it does have, I believe it has hyper integrated into it. But yeah, you can see here, so from 500 megs down to 33, and then just by aggregating it up to 1 mile. And then from there, what you'd be able to do in the visualization is choose a state or pick the road type here. So that's where those extra fields kind of come in. My thought with this would be, let's say for instance you were looking at, or you have the information already from Nielsen and you're looking to do billboards, you could actually see what roads your billboards are placed on in relation to Nielsen, and then know okay, yeah, if someone's driving from maybe Mississippi down or Louisiana down to Orlando to visit, what major roads are they passing? So, I mean, obviously you can have some of this as institutional knowledge, but I think the goal is to be able to display this in such a way where that institutional knowledge can be reached faster by some of the newer people that are coming on the team. So that's, yeah. Yeah, and then did you download that workbook already? And we can kind of show them the drill down. Okay. Yeah. So feel free to, yeah. I mean, if you want to post it in the chat again, I think I did, but it was pretty early on, so I know a few people have come into the room since then. So let's kind of dive into that. Guys, I use the help just as much as everybody else, so please, like, whenever you're looking at tools or you're curious about them, you have the help button here. So it'll pop up, and this is literally what it's doing. So when you're looking at generalized areas, you have to think of spatial files as a series of little dots. So imagine using like an Etch-a-Sketch, right? And imagine how much hand power it would take to draw out these little area maps. And you can see like all of these little edges here, right? So when you're dealing with things like counties or maybe individual streets, this may be important because you're trying to avoid any overlap. But when you're dealing with things like roads, there isn't going to be as much overlap, especially when you're talking about primary and secondary roads. So what this is trying to achieve is, how can I block this out in such a way where I reduce the amount of data that's needing to be processed. So in this instance, I went to 1 mile, so it's stretching these out in a configuration where basically it's monitoring every mile to kind of keep these nice straight lines. And unless people are drilling down to that smaller level precision, you don't necessarily need that. You can set it up to where you can specify the units. So if you are working like Andy Kriebel in the UK and you need kilometers instead, or maybe you're doing Canada or South America, you can adjust that as well. You can preserve the consistency with the layers. I use this on occasion. I don't do as much work with spatial as I would like, but I'm going to be changing that soon. So if you guys are interested in seeing more spatial, I will have a pretty thorough knowledge over the next few months of some of the newer features that are included in these tools. And there are different ways that you can adjust the polygons. I mean, it's even going into the algorithm here, which I've taken a look at that a couple times just to kind of understand what it's doing for that easing and smoothing. It also, if you guys did want to see the polygons, if you throw a browse tool on here, and let's go ahead and rerun this just so we can see it, it will actually show you all of those little polygons. So you can see like this little segment here. So that looks like the state of Alabama, right? And then let's see if I can zoom in on here. It's going to be a hefty zoom, right? Where'd you go? So you can start to see these little outlines forming here. And it's a little tricky when it's a single instance here, but you can start to see this web forming. And those are all the roads that run throughout the state. And I mean, this can even offer as a cursory check for you as you're looking at these things. See, so there's the state, And keep in mind, I mean, there's different ways that you can display this. So you can still profile your data. In this instance, there's not much here because it is a map. But make sure you explore these tabs because some of these are on the core exam. They want you to know just these individual windows and how you go about looking for information. You can even do a side-by-side if you want. So if you're trying to check specific things, you can go about doing that here. So let's get that back to what it should be. And then does anybody else have any other questions about how we arrived at this? Any of the parsing, shape files? Is anyone interested in seeing how you can pull down the files holistically? So like all 50 files. Oh yeah. I figured there'd be a few people excited about that. Yeah, so I was really annoyed the first time I went to go and pull something from the census. I assumed there would be like a download all button, right? But they still have to throttle the amount of data that you're pulling into or out of their system. So the best way that they can do that is by putting these physical hurdles in the way. But because you have an amazing product like Alteryx, you can make it pretty easy to get in there. So let's go in here. Let's see, sandbox. Could dive back in here. Let's go through it here. Yeah, so this was actually another part of the census that I was pulling from. And this part of the census is related to the actual demographic information. So when you're going and looking at this, you have to start getting creative about how you're parsing up the URL, because that is normally the trigger for a lot of these. The census is kind of all over the place in terms of offering you a clean way to pull. So some of the things that you'll notice when you're hunting around here, which I'll do this just briefly. Let's do, economic. So you can even do like the economic census. And when you go here, there's different ways to download it. So some of them will have API connections. Some of them will have like 5 different formats that are available to download. And then others, it's similar to what you just saw with relation to the shape files, where there's a dialog box trigger. And what you can do is you can trick this by just, if you click on here, oh, I already clicked, you can start investigating the source pages. And this is normally what I end up doing. So I look in here, and so this is JavaScript. Sometimes you can find some XML or the URL trigger. And what you can do from here is pull this in such a way where what you're doing is you're separating out the URL. So in this instance, this is the URL for this file. And then all I'm doing is I have a single statement here just to show you guys the example. I want to pull Florida down, so I'm just appending that on here. So what you would do is append all 50 states onto this URL, and then you can combine the URL. So you have the original one for the site, you just add the state name on there, do a /, and then abbreviate the state name, and then you have the URL end, which is just the year with the zip file. And then from there, you can utilize the download tool. So I have the completed URL here, and then I'm just downloading the file name. So when you run this, let's see where this is sending it out to. Yeah. So let's adjust this because this was on my other computer. So here's actually another cool trick. If, for instance, you aren't sure where you're going to be keeping this, or you would just like it with the rest of your files with this particular workflow, you can just do a little dot. And what that'll do is that will actually pipe it to the same directory as your workflow. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll rerun. And you notice it will take a little bit. I think it took about 2 or 3 hours for this. But these files are huge compared to the shape. After I unzipped it, it turned into like 350 gig. So do keep that in mind if you are working with a smaller computer, that these files, once you unzip them, will be fairly large and may eat up your entire computer. So if you do want to play around with it and just get a feel for how it works, I would definitely recommend only doing one zip file at a time and then kind of work your way from there. And we can kind of circle back around to this. Did you guys have any more questions about shape files while this is running? And if not, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and skip on to dealing with dates. Alright, so you can see it's still running. So obviously this does take a while. Don't expect it to happen overnight, but, well, it will happen over the night, but be thankful that you don't have to go down and download each one of these 50 files. So this one looks like it's almost complete, and we can circle back around to that later. From here, let's kind of dive into the next segment, which is date night out. So this is just a tips and tricks basically with dates. So we'll go through, and I want to do this part kind of as a live portion. So if you guys have any dates that you do need parsed or you always have problems with, please feel free to paste some of the dates in the bottom in the chat window. I always love a good challenge, especially live. And we can work through some of those with you, and then I'll go through some of the best practices kind of live here in the window, and then we've got a few more general announcements that we'll do, and then we'll open up the floor to helping you with whatever problems you have. All right, so let's hop back into it. Ta-da! So 7 minutes for one file. And then you can see that is downloaded here, and then it triggered OK. And then if I navigate to this particular file, we'll look at this real quick just so you can see what it looks like. So with this particular one, what I did with the name is it has the census information. And then with this one thing that was actually tricky, and you'll find this with different aspects of the census, please, if you guys are interested in doing more with the census, let me know. And what we can do is we actually know some people from the U.S. Census Bureau that would be more than happy to present, and we can do a session with them about unlocking their data, and they're always happy to help. So please, if you're looking for that, post it in the chat, and then we'll make sure within the next couple meetings that is definitely one of the topics. And so back to what I was talking about with this, if you notice this suffix is really weird, the SF1, what you can do is you can actually create a macro or a workflow that will go in and substitute and adjust all these names. And essentially these are a bunch of CSVs. And when you open those, it turns into this wonderful little file. Let's see if I can edit it here. Come on. So what you're doing from here, just adjusting that suffix, and then you'll go in and you can append all of those files together. And now we'll dive into the dates. So how many people know all of the different ways that you can work with a date in Alteryx? Emil, how many dates do you think there are? Yeah. So you can do a quick search up here. So you can see I made one there, but you've got 4 different ones that just have the name date in here. So this one's obviously a macro tool. These 3 I use quite a bit. So this one up at the top, this is literally just what is the date time now. And then you also have, if you browse through these, you have the date filter, which you can see right here. There's the one in the parse, which is up here. And probably one of my favorite ways to actually manipulate dates is with the formula tool. So if you go in the functions, you have this entire setup with date times and stuff here. Now, something that is a common problem is it may not be in the format that you want. It may not be readable by your visualization tool. And I think a more common problem that we don't necessarily recognize is breaking up the dates for the person who's utilizing it within Tableau. So Tableau or Click, if you have your visualization tool, and right now Tableau has the split date time feature, but obviously that does eat up some of the resources as far as the engine. So when you're looking at date times, let's take for instance, I have a handful here with the different formats, right? So if we go in here, these ones in particular, here's the examples that were given, and then here's what they turn into. What you'll find when you're reporting, Emil, I mean, you can kind of talk about this. How many ways do you normally display the filters in relation to the visualization tool? So, I mean, this is probably one of the best ways to show you. So if you're trying to get comfortable with some of the date time parsing, this tool is excellent because what it's doing is it's highlighting the date time format and then it's converting it to a string. So the instances that you would need to do that is, let's say, for instance, and Emil was talking about year-over-year reporting. Well, what they may be doing is they may be just selecting the month, right? And we want that to be human readable. So what you may want to do in that instance is put out the entire month in textual form. You can do that here. This is a quick way to learn. So I have the date time format coming in here. So it looks like the standard SQL format or the standard Alteryx format. And then from there, what you're doing is you can type in the commands here, which are pretty standardized. So I can type in month here. I could just do which is just going to give me the numerical value. I believe it's MON. is going to give you the abbreviation. So if you have people asking you for these things, you can go through and actually grab all of these and give it to them in a field so they can apply these as filters. And that can be extremely useful when people are trying to decipher things. That way they're not looking at most common, let's say it's a date timestamp. So if you have a date timestamp too, that may also throw out some of the calculations. Emil can probably talk a little bit more about that as far as instances where you may have millions of records in a day, and if you have that and you're trying to aggregate those, what are some of the complications that you have if you don't have a field like this? Emil? So what would be the approach to converting calendar dates to fiscal dates? Thank you, Louis. So is there any date tool integration in Alteryx which will facilitate this task? So I was literally about to touch on this. Obviously there's fiscal calendars, and they're not necessarily tied to the standard calendar. So it depends on what type of calendar setup you have. So for instance, at Universal, the calendar setup was the fiscal week ended on Sunday, and some companies it's Friday. So when you're looking at that, one of the things that you may want to consider is actually, even while it's going through the workflow, isolating the day. So if you noticed, I dropped this in here. It spells out Monday, right? But with that little bit of space, that's actually giving you the month and the day of the week. So the one thing that they haven't integrated in here yet is the count of the week. So 1 through 52, that is not available, but you do have the days and the months available. And I think actually there are some macros that have been shared in the public gallery that actually do count the weeks. So what I would recommend doing with that is, let's say for instance, the anchor date is on a Sunday. Let's go ahead and run this. What you could do is you could loop this in such a way where what it's going to do is you can do a multi-row formula, and then you can count out the days, or you can even count out the Sundays or whatever day is associated with the beginning of the year, and then you could technically count out the 52. And what that would give you is all the weeks in the year, and they're numbered, and you could number those accordingly. So let's say, for instance, this year I am starting with like week 5. You could actually set that up in here where you can do the row count. So let's go to generate rows here. So I could initialize this expression on 5. I'll do this as a quick example. So actually, let's do a field. We can do week count or fiscal week, right? So let's go and run this. So you can see it added on those extra weeks. And then In this instance, I iterated this, but when you're looping these expressions like this, what this will allow you to do is, let's say, for instance, I wanted a reference calculator, or sorry, a reference calendar to calculate those fiscal weeks. What you can do is you can go through this and generate that. That's honestly my best suggestion, is go through the hassle of building out the fiscal calendar once as a reference, and then add all those additional fields like we were talking about. So maybe it's the day of the week, or maybe you want to see the month in there. And I mean, literally this could turn into a 15 tool workflow that generates that entire calendar for you. And then you're just appending this on, or you could even turn this into a macro and embed it in all your workflows if you needed to make adjustments regularly. So like this one, let's see, string field that we're pulling in, we're going to pull in this one, right? And output it. And let's say I want the month here now. So if I run this, I've got 18 instances, and you can see January's there now. And those are all January 1st. And then that's the idea here, right? So you can continue to generate the rows, utilizing whatever's in the workflow. So maybe you have that first handful of dates that you're grabbing from, and now I can build out what the day of the week is, what the month is, the fiscal calendar with the week number, or even the day number of the year. So that one, what you would do is just reference the first of the year, and then you can do a count. So doing that, let's figure out how far away we are from the beginning of the year, how many days, right? So we want to do a standard format, so it's a little easier to work with here at the top. Okay, so I can do day of year here, and then what that is going to be, you can do a date time diff equation. And so we're going to put our first date, which would be, what is it today, right? So you can use this here, or there's even an equation that is just the date time now, which I'm sure you guys saw. Let me go ahead and put that down here. There you go. So that would technically give you today as well. And then a quick tip for the core exam if you're studying for it. So there's actually two ways you can comment out in Alteryx. There's the /* and then at the end you can do star and then / again, and that will comment it out. So let's go back here real quick. So date time now, and then we have the other date, right? Which is going to be let's go ahead and do it this way. There we go. Alright, so if I have 2017 -01 let's forget these. And Emil, how many of these do you know? So then what you're going to do is you're just going to put the increment of time, right? For that, and I'm missing one thing here. Oh, so it looks like it's a little mad. Let's go ahead and generate. We'll generate one more. Blinking on this a little bit. So I'll append a field with that date time format that we had here. So the goal is just to find out how many days since the beginning of the year, right? Okay. Yeah, that's really, I mean, going to be the key for you is, let's see, yeah, you can't do a 2 date here. That's, drop it here. What do we got going on? No, yeah, that's my fault. There we go. This. And so obviously that, I don't even know where it got that date from. Oh, 10/25. Yeah, where's it pulling that from? Oh, 24 days. Yes, because I didn't count. Yeah, so let's do that. Yeah, that's literally only going to count the days. So you have different ways of looking at this. So even that isn't going to check the day of year. I think there is actually a formula that does that. I think that's like star. There's a star dy or something. That is day of year. So if you go to so it'll have all the formats listed down here at the bottom. This is actually a really good help section. So this will give you all of the different date formats. And I'll go ahead and post this in here. So if you're looking, there, yeah, that's why I couldn't remember. It's a J. So that will give you the actual day of the year. Oh. Yeah. So actually, you could do it even easier. Go back in here. Let's reverse that. So you need to convert both of these to using the date format tools. This guy here. And then you'll do the star J. And what that'll give you is what you're looking for. So that'll give you literally the day of the year. And then you can just substitute, or not substitute, subtract the two of those, and that'll give you the difference between the beginning of the year and the actual day of the year for this guy. This needs to go to 2 number because you're actually converting back and forth here. There you go. And it's literally doing the same thing. So hypothetically, that should be grabbing the difference in the total days, but it's not doing it. I don't think I've ever seen it behave like that before. Yeah, have you ever seen that, Emil? All right, so now what we're going to do is kind of open it up. Gone through some daytime things. If you guys have some more of those, I'd be happy to help. Let's go through the last couple announcements that we have. So we are going to be doing more with Alteryx for Good again this later half of the year and into next. We're going to start looking at how we can help out the community. So a couple of the ones that I have been talking to lately since the Tableau conference, there's actually the Second Harvest Food Bank, and they actually serve over, I think it's 50 or 60 food locations in the Central Florida area, and they move over $80 million worth of food and deliver that to the homeless. So they have some people developing in Tableau now, and I do know that they need some help with their data. If you guys are interested in that, please feel free to message us in the chat or pass on your information. The Dr. Phillips Center is also, so that's the Performing Arts Center downtown here in Orlando. They had reached out to me last night as well, showing interest in looking for help. So we did just start the preliminary discussions with them, but if you have interest in the arts and are looking to help, they are looking for assistance. And as always, we will be talking with UCF and some of the other local colleges. So if you're interested in possibly doing some public speaking or are looking for interns who know Alteryx or visualization tools, reach out to me and we can make sure to send them your direction. And then if you're interested in any other Alteryx for Good projects, you can always talk to Quinn or Tori. So our next meeting is going to be at Adventist Health System. That is in the Altamont Maitland area off of Maitland Boulevard and I-4. And the goal is to have that during the first couple weeks in December, and the time is TBD. And not all problems can be as fun as this one, but if you guys have any, I'm more than happy to take a look at them and we can discuss them here. Please go ahead and feel free to reach out in the chat, and we can work through some of them. Oh, yes. Yeah, so learning about building macros, and I completely skipped over the core exam. So let's circle back around to those two things. So learning and building macros, I would definitely recommend the community. There's going to be some good stuff in there, so let's go ahead and term this out so we can go into the community. And what I'd really recommend doing, let's go back to, so let's talk about the core exam a little bit, and we'll touch on your question, John. Yeah, so there's the self-paced training. If you're looking for any of those aspects, let's see here. Yes, so the first core exam is going to be free, and then that's just going to go over the favorite tools. So it looks like we're getting a little bit of a lag here. This is going to be the best source for learnings right here. So you can do the weekly challenges. You've got the live training sessions here. So these will give you all your different problems. Sean is the man. As you can see, he's posting like crazy. I think he's actually done all of them. They're almost to 100 now. There's also the live trainings. So I just did one of those literally 2 hours ago, and you can see all of these posted. And I do think they actually have a macro one. And if you were looking for a recap, let's see. We can find one here. Yeah. Somebody posted. I know I've seen some. Oh, it was apps. I just saw it. Let's go back here real quick. There you go. So, John, this is definitely a good source right here. There is a difference between apps and macros. So, apps, most of the time, are meant for the end user to interact without necessarily having to go into Designer. Similar to like the little install applications that you're opening when you want to install a new piece of software. There's a little widget that kind of comes up, and it has a little interface that you click through and then run the workflow, so to speak. that's going to be an app, and then a macro is what you're embedding onto the actual dashboard itself. So we can dive into, have one handy. We'll dive into that here in just a few minutes. But let me go over the core exam real quick to give you guys an overview of what's included in that. I would definitely look at file types that are within Alteryx. There was quite a few questions in relation to those. So if you go to the help and you're interested in learning some of these different aspects, you can do some searches on here to get more details. So you have files. So these are literally all the different files that can be output from Alteryx that are specific to Alteryx. So you have a package tool, workflows. Most of you guys are probably familiar with if you're working with server. Here's a general workflow. And then if you want to know if something's an app, you can look for the Z versus the C. So even if you're just looking through a directory and you want to understand how those are functioning, these are good sources. Then you can also store things like values. So this would be a backup of your workflow. You can store field types. So if you're doing things dynamic, for example, like pulling off of a particular site. So I had done a lot of these in the past where, let's say for instance, I started building out a workflow after this download tool. Sometimes Alteryx will forget what these field names are and start triggering errors later in the workflow when you're clicking around and you haven't run the workflow in a while. So what you can actually do is you can save off those fields, that field information. You just go here into options and then you can save. And that'll create this little file. And then you can reload it if you need to. That'll save all of the information that's in here. So you do have the option of whether you just want to load the names or if you want to load the types too, and it'll always keep the descriptions in there to start off if you are using that to feed off something. Let's say for instance you wanted all of the fields, you're using a filter where you're searching for that particular input data set again later in your workflow. You can grab all those by using the field info tool. Also for macros, we can dive a little bit into those. They don't ask too many questions in regards to that on the exam. The primary tools that they're going to be looking at are everything that's here in your favorites, which are these guys right here. So you'll see a lot of those. You will see some crosstab examples, and then also the transpose. And what I'd really suggest doing is kind of going through some of these tools. And in the community, if you go back to the training, they have the tool mastery series. And there's actually a couple of those, so you'll see all these start to pop up. So let's go here real quick. And what that'll do is these literally go through all of these different tools, and I can tell you a lot of these are on the exam, minus the reporting tools. There aren't very many on the reporting tools. But John, if you're looking for some of those macro aspects, you've got it right here. And what this will do is this will literally walk you through with some awesome memes. I think there's a meme in at least one meme in all of these. And it'll walk you through how to use these different aspects, what the little individual anchors mean, what they can link to, walk you through an example, and then a lot of them even have the little workflow that you can download to check those out. And macros are definitely an awesome thing to use. They do help you in understanding each of the tools better just because you're diving into some of the menus that you wouldn't normally within a tool, or understanding how Alteryx processes the data. And the other aspect that I would recommend while you're doing the exam is go ahead and keep your community window open and also the help. That way you can search. It's an open book test, so feel free to go hunting while you're working on it. The other thing that I would suggest doing is throwing your workflows, if you are generating some of them, because they will quiz you on here's a beginning data set and then here's an end data set. What tool would you need to use in between to get it to look like the end data set? Which the perfect way to train for that is literally those is literally back here in the community, in the academy, and you're doing those weekly challenges, because that's what they give you. They give you a beginning and an ending data set, and they ask you, hey, how am I going to work through this? Let's take a quick look at one of those. Yeah, so we can go to spoilers. So they're going through, okay, here's how their workflow goes, and you can look at examples and get a feel for all the different ways that you can accomplish the workflow. They'll have multiple choice or multiple select questions where there may be 3 different ways to get that result, and they want you to tell them these are all the ways that are possible. So to register for the exam, you can just search for the core certification again. And there's a link. And the way that that kicks off is at the beginning of every month, they send out an email for those who signed up in the prior month. So I'll paste this here in this window so you guys can get signed up. And what you'll do is you'll have 3 attempts for the entire month. Multiple choice, really simple. There's 80 questions, and when you finish, you'll get an awesome badge on the community. And then you can tell all your friends how amazing you are with Alteryx. And so from there, let's dive a little bit into macros, unless someone has some questions. And then we can keep on that for a little while until we get some more questions in regards to workflows. Yeah, and I think, if I remember correctly, let's look here. Yeah, so here's another thing to keep in mind is this certification is good for 3 years. So they're obviously going through, like with Tableau, Alteryx, and Click, and Power BI, they're cranking through these versions, the major versions, pretty quickly. So you don't have to anticipate paying or trying to take this exam every year. It is 2 hours long. It's 80 questions. It goes by pretty quick. But once you finished it, it's good for 3 years. So keep that in mind if you are on the fence about taking it. It's well worth the time. Okay, and then let's dive into macros. So John, I don't know, are you able to talk right now? That way we can talk about some specific questions that you had in regards to macros, or I can show you a couple of the ones that I built that are fairly general. Yeah. Oh, nice. Okay. 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 So So let's go through a handful of things. When you first start working with macros, one of the best things to do is just take a functional workflow that is delivering the results for you that you want and convert it into a macro. So let's say, for instance, you want to save off a different version, but then literally what you can do is you can right click on that input that you have and convert to a macro input. So there's a couple things that you need to keep in mind when you're trying to create macros from scratch. And that's, you need to look right here in this window. And you'll have a text input, which means that you can type the information in manually, or you can do a file input. So if he's grabbing from a file and all these files look the same, then you can adjust that configuration in here. Or if you already had the input set up, like I did with this one, and you right click on it and convert it, it'll save all those settings in there. And then now it's just going to grab these new files the same way that you set up for this first one. So then I'd recommend, make sure you adjust the names, also the abbreviation, just so you can read it. And then from there, so showing the field map, what that does is that makes it to where if the column names are different for each of these individual files and I wanted to process them independently instead of like in an iterative fashion, then what you would want to do is set this up. And maybe there's batches, like for instance, this goes back to the date thing, right? Some of them could be annual reports that you're pulling, and then you could have quarterly and monthly at different points in the timeline for this particular set of data. So if those have different field names, then you can adjust those here and get them set up, and then you can also make some of the things an optional connection. For the output, it's a little different. You can't just move that over to the macro output. But let's say, for instance, that's set up here. So you can keep practicing and look how the output is forming. And then this particular output, what it's going to do if you're using the macro output is it's going to push it back into the workflow. So normally this is one of those differences between a macro and an app. Most of the apps are just going to output a file or push it to some location, either your visualization server or maybe a network drive. Whereas this, you may want to keep doing something with those files that you're tapping into. And as you noticed, as I started dropping these things on here, you'll start to notice the little question pop up and the little lightning bolt. So the lightning bolt is going to connect to an action, which those actions kind of give you those values and stuff here. Now, what you'll want to do is start to parameterize some of these things if you know the values aren't going to stay consistent. And this is where it starts to get tricky and takes a little bit of work. obviously you can go in here and select this, and let's just say it was file name that was the issue. Everything else needs to stay the same, right? Let's say the field that I'm swapping out is file name. Then I can just do this, and that's going to swap that file name for me as I'm running through it. Now, one of the biggest things that I would take away and share with your friend, if you're not accustomed to making macros, go here in the view, and then there's this interface designer, or you can do Control-Alt-D, and that'll pop up this other window. I pretty much always keep this on, and then what you're doing is dragging it in here, and then if you notice here on the bottom, I have the results tab, which you're used to, and then this interface designer layout. So this is where you get to set up the cool things like the look and feel, so you can swap out how the tool looks here. Otherwise you end up with a bunch of boring circles. I have quite a few of those, but I get really creative with mine, so they have lots of cool little logos and stuff. But if you don't want to do that, you can at least group it in the tool accordingly. Then from there you've got the hyperlink for the help, and this is where the spicy stuff is at. So let's say, for instance, I am going to do a checkbox here, right? So if you notice, checkbox popped up in here. Well, if you go here to the magic wand, then you can actually start selecting different options and testing this out. And when you test this out, all you have to do is open the debug. It'll tell you what preferences were selected, and now it just looks like a normal workflow. But what it's actually doing is it's going in here and it's substituting out that value for you, and then you can see how this functions. Okay, this portion isn't working right, or everything's working smoothly and it's cooperating. That's my biggest suggestion for looking at those. You can kind of take apart and do what you were talking about, which is taking apart other people's macros. Some of the macros, depending on how advanced you're looking to get within Alteryx, are visible. Most of those are the R ones. So the R tools, if you drag something like that onto the canvas, you can see all this interface and stuff here. If you right click on it, you'll notice that it has open the macro, and this will show you everything in here. What I like to do is I try and share some of these best practices for grouping things together and clustering them. And then I still have yet, I need to ask someone on the development team why they do the tools used, because you can simply just do Control F and find all the tools. But this is important because it does give you a description here, especially when you guys are going through and sharing each other's macros. So from there you can go on the public gallery and grab some of those. You can also trial some of the different ones. Let me see if I can grab one here that I can share with you guys. Okay, so this is one that I've been working on, where what the end goal is with this particular tool is I am going through, and let me drag this onto the canvas real quick here. So this tool what the goal is this is for header standardization. So my goal is to figure out where the original cells came from, and then also to figure out whether they've transitioned since the beginning of the workflow. And what this does is, let's say for instance something's coming from Alteryx or a database. So like for instance this particular field has been manipulated in some way. So let's transition this back. So we'll substitute this one out just so I can show you guys. And you can see this is in the debug. It shows you debug up here at the top. So sometimes I'll be running through like 3 or 4 different ones and trying different things out and copying and pasting them together. But the idea behind this is, if you notice, there's these ones with an A here in the front, right? Those columns have been manipulated or are originally generated in Alteryx. And that's because in the select tool, you notice I've altered the names entirely here. So if you go and you look at the metadata, which some of that you can see here in these tools, you'll notice where the original source was from. And what it's doing is it's essentially going through and it's checking these. Did it exist here? And what was the naming convention? And then has it been altered here? And then if it has, then what I'm doing is a lowercase, the A underscore, and then filling in the rest of the information here. So it knows that all of these have been altered in some way. So a lot of this just takes practice, but definitely pulling apart other people's macros helps. You can do that simply by just going on the public gallery if you're looking for some fun ones. So let's see if I can remember. Been on there in a while. So you can go in here and there's tons and tons of workflows in here. And what you can do is go through and grab these and test them out. There's even different districts. So if you were just looking for macros in particular, you can look here. And what I did at first is I went through and grabbed a lot of these just to practice with. And then as you start to get more advanced, then you can build them from scratch with the original intent of having to build out a macro, which would be what I did in this particular instance. So like this macro right here, there's actually another one embedded in here. And then this is where you start layering. So what this is doing is it's grabbing the field info. And you can see I just put some dummy data. So you were asking about how you trigger this. I just did a simple text input and then wrote these in here just so it had data to play with and I could work through all of these different components. And then what I'm doing is I'm flagging, okay, with ones that come from multiple data sources, is it unaltered? These were columns that were created in Alteryx because I noticed that the source had been altered. And then these were the ones that I only altered within Alteryx. And so what it'll do is it'll go in and adjust these names similar to how you see here. So originally this started out as field 4, and then outputs here. While you're working with macros, these little guys will become your best friends. So you can see how everything's transitioning and what the naming convention is. And normally what I recommend doing is after you do the first iteration, then figure out ways that you can test. So you had mentioned the 150 files that he's working on. Get it to work with 1, then get it to work with maybe like 3 to 5. And there's going to be different issues that kind of crop up as you continue to scale this up. Part of that may even be just the runtime. Are you comfortable with it? And then you can kind of go from there in regards to getting it to where it runs with everything. And you may find you need little extra options in here, such as turning these things off. And you can use some of these guys. The developer tools also will become huge friends of yours for the renaming, the selecting. I do a lot of the selecting and the detours as well. So you can branch off your workflow and maybe address a particular situation and then pull it back in and send it back out to the rest of your workflow.